Okay, so welcome everybody. I know many of you, but I don't know everybody here. I'd like to welcome you to our legislative session for Justice Washington. I'm Deb Cruz, and my name is Deb Cruz, and I'm Justice Washington President. And we are kicking off our summit season this year with the legislative session in time for hopefully getting involved in the legislative process. I know we did a pretty good job last year. Let's see if we can do as good this year as well, and maybe even better. So I'd like to welcome you all who come in the spirit of goodwill are welcome here. I'd like to introduce a couple of people before we get into the crux of it. Elle Parks, where are you, dear? Okay, she's our tech support tonight.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elle Parks. I'm a revitalization team lead here at Just WA, also a neuroethicist and graduating from Star King School for the ministry this upcoming May. I'm providing technical assistance this evening, so please message me if you have any questions or concerns or issues. I'm here to help.
Okay, one of the first things we do when we start out our sessions is we do a land acknowledgement. And I am going to read the land acknowledgement that we do up here in Whatcom County. If you don't have a land acknowledgement for the area that you live in, I might suggest that you try finding out and coming up with a land acknowledgement. It may take a little bit of research for you to do that, but it is one way to acknowledge and honor the tribes and nations who were here before us. And if you don't know what tribes were in your area, you can go to, Elle's going to put in the chat, a website that you can go in and you can type your address up and it'll give you the names of the tribes for your area. We acknowledge the land and territory. We acknowledge that this is the land and territory of the Lummi and Nooksack peoples. Their presence is imbued in these mountains, valleys, waterways, and shorelines. May we nurture our relationship with our Coast Salish neighbors and the shared responsibilities to their homelands where we all reside today. So while we continue through the introductions, if you would please take a moment to write in the chat box your name, your congregation or your organization, and the city and state that you're in, and the indigenous territory where you reside. So for those of you who are not familiar with Justice Washington, we are a UU State Action Network who works on networking and collaborating our individuals and congregations and our allies and partners in addressing a myriad of social and environmental justice issues. So while we say we're Justice Washington, that's kind of a misnomer because we do expand beyond just the state of Washington and go into our regional capacity in some issues and even on a national level in some issues. So if you want to get more information on who we are and the kinds of things we do, you can go to justicewa.org or justwa.org, and Elle's going to put that in the chat as well. And you can check out some of the things that we've been doing for quite some time now. And it's a myriad of issues. So I'd also want to give you a heads up that, like I said before, this is the first of the summits. We will be having other summits on environmental justice, racial justice, the refugee and immigrant and migrant solidarity. So those are the three other big ones that we're going to have between now and the beginning of summer. So keep your eye out for that. In the chat box, Elle is also going to put in a link to our guidelines for gathering, and they're just basically guidelines for how we treat each other in gatherings of this nature. So if you would take a second to peek at those. So the of this particular session tonight is we're going to be working on laying the groundwork for addressing justice issues through our state legislature. And tonight we have some of our legislators with us who are going to talk about a number of potential legislation that's coming up, the ones that are pre-filed and the new ones that are being endorsed, and maybe touch base on some of the ones that didn't make it last year, and kind of give us some help in figuring out what we can do to support or oppose, to comment on, to provide testimony on, and see what we can get done in this legislative session. So I'm going to introduce our legislators, and I'd like to say thank you because they were here with us last year and they agreed to come back again this year, which is significant. So
once we get love from you, we keep coming back for more love.
Amen. So now I went to the website to get your committee assignments. I don't know if they're updated or not. So if I say something that's not current, then please let me know. We've got, did Deborah come back in yet? I don't see her. So Alex Ramel, Representative 4th District, you are on the Environment and Energy Committees, the Finance Committee, the Rules Committee, Transportation Committee, and you're also Deputy Whip of the Democratic Caucus. Is that right? Okay. And Mylene Tai, 41st District, Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee, Finance Committee, Housing and Human Services and Veterans Committee, Rules Committee, and Majority Caucus Vice Chair. Is that correct?
There is one minor change.
Okay.
I am now sitting in a Public Safety Committee instead of Housing and Human Services.
Okay. So Public Safety. So Alex, everything was okay with you?
You got it perfect.
Okay, cool. Okay, so, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to give each, Deborah Lakanoff, Representative Deborah Lakanoff is supposed to be coming in at some point too. So as soon as she pops in, we'll give her some time and space as well. We're going to give each one minutes to talk about legislation that's on the agenda and give us some background information, and then whatever requests for assistance that they may need, and recommendations. So I throw it out to either one of you who wants to go first. We'll have a question and answer period afterwards.
Alex, could you go first? I'm still trying to find a bill number. Otherwise, I'd be like so embarrassed. That bill, that's really, really good bill, but I can't remember the number.
Oh, yeah. I'll do the best I can. I may not take the whole 20 minutes. We may just invite more back and forth here.
That's fine.
I can't imagine anybody wants to listen to me talk for 20 whole minutes in a row. So thanks so much, Deb, for all the work that you and Elle and everybody else does to organize folks and bring folks together. And thanks everybody here for your advocacy on behalf of justice in Washington State. It really does make a difference. And I think one of the things, if we're looking for bright sides for the pandemic, one of the things that has come out of this is just the way that our legislature has become more accessible to everyday people, not just lobbyists. So I'm in Bellingham, and it used to be that it took me 3 hours to go down and get 15-minute meeting with a legislator, and then you drive home for another 3 hours through Seattle traffic, or to get 2 minutes in front of a committee. And we're now able to do all of that remotely. And I am encouraged and hopeful that worked as well as it did last year, and hope you all will continue to take full advantage of that, those opportunities to have your voice heard. It sounds like you're planning ahead and getting ready to do it. So that's great to see. So I'll just talk about a couple of sets of priorities that I have, and use this opportunity also to lobby Representative Tai to sign on as a co-sponsor to a couple of my bills. I'm sure she'll do the same to me. I'm on, one of the areas that I think I sort of showed, I should step back briefly just by way of introduction. Again, Alex Rammel, representative for the 40th district. I use he, him pronouns. The 40th district is in Bellingham, where I am, traditional territory of the Lummi and Nooksack people. It also extends into Skagit County and or parts of Skagit County and the San Juan Islands, including traditional territories or parts of the traditional territories of the Samish people, the Swinomish people, and the Upper Skagit tribe. So I've worked, a lot of the work that I've done has been on the Energy and Environment Committee, and specifically focused on confronting our climate crisis. And last year, the legislature, I think, took historic and unprecedented steps, passing the Climate Commitment Act, Low Carbon Fuel Standard, and the Healthy Environment for All Act. Some big steps that have been almost there for a few years, and we finally got it across the finish line. Unfortunately, there is still a lot more work to be done in those fields, and so I'll just mention a couple of bills that I think are important priorities. Some of mine, but also a few others that others have been working on. So one of those is Davina Doer's bill, House Bill 1099, which integrates climate planning into the Growth Management Act and really requires all city and county governments around Washington to be planning for what I would call climate adaptation, being ready for the consequences of climate change, because like it or not, some of those are already baked in. As we've seen last year with the heat dome effect, as we saw here in Whatcom and Skagit County just last month with the unprecedented flooding caused by warmer than usual air carrying more water when the rain comes. We need to be prepared for climate disasters and for the changes that are coming, and we need our local governments to be doing that planning. It also requires, and it's not just enough to plan for the problems. We should do everything we can to solve them. And so that bill also requires the larger governments around the state, larger cities and county governments around the state, to be planning for greenhouse gas reduction, especially with an eye towards reducing vehicle miles traveled. That's one of the things that our cities and counties are best equipped to do, is planning for communities that don't need automobiles for everybody to get around. So that's high priority. We got that out of the House last year, made its way partway through the Senate, but just didn't have time to get across the finish line. So I'm excited to see that one move forward. Another Davina Doer bill that I think is an important priority is House Bill 1774. And that one relates to energy code. And it does two things that I think are important. The first is that it gives local governments that want to take a step further on energy, on having a better energy code than the minimum required by the state, it gives them the authority to do that. So right now, cities can do that for commercial buildings, but not residences, not homes. And so counties are like King County are contemplating doing that for commercial buildings right now. Seattle has already done it. Shoreline has done it. City of Bellingham is looking to do it, knock on wood, this month. Hope you'll all be advocating at the city level too. But they don't have the authority to do that for residential. And so it would provide that authority there. It will also ramp up sort of the next level in our stair-step steady improvement for energy efficiency in buildings. In Washington, we've got commitment to be consistently improving energy efficiency in our buildings between basically, whenever the bill was passed, 2012-ish and 2031. But we don't have a path after 2031 to keep making improvements. And so it creates the next steps in that path and gives the building industry, something to shoot for looking out into the future. So that's House Bill 1774. Excuse me, that's 1770. 1774 is the next one on my list. That's David Hackney bill, which is relates to existing building energy efficiency. So we have a building performance program in Washington already passed in 2019 that is applies to large commercial buildings. That program is nation leading. It's one of the first in the nation, but other states have followed that action. New York, Colorado, they're moving into smaller buildings and into multifamily buildings. And so this would continue that logical progression. And really the important thing here is that what this does is addresses what we call the split incentive problem. So if I'm renting and my landlord is leasing me a place that is energy efficient, it's drafty, it's cold in the winter, my heating bills are $200 a month in January, I have no incentive to improve that house, to put insulation in it. I'm not going to be around for 20 years to recoup the benefits of improving the building. And my landlord doesn't pay the bills, so what does he care? That split incentive means that we're just ignoring cost-effective improvements that we should be making on those buildings. And these building performance standards will address that problem. So that's a solution not just to climate change, but also for a lot of folks, here in Bellingham, just down the hill from Western Washington University. There's a lot of students with astronomical energy bills. So this is a social justice as well as a climate justice priority. The next two bills I will mention are both bills that I'm going to be the prime sponsor on. House Bill 1767 is relates to consumer-owned electric utilities. It's like Seattle City Lights, Snohomish County PUDs, public utility districts, and municipal utilities. And it authorizes those utilities to have programs to help their customers upgrade to clean electric heat sources, as long as it's in the benefit of those customers and of the energy utility. Other utilities are already allowed to do that. Puget Sound Energy can do that if they're your electric company. Vista can do that if they're your electric company on the other side of the state. But the municipal utilities and the PUDs just aren't allowed to right now. That's an oversight. It's a weird quirk of decisions made a long time ago that are no longer relevant. And so we should fix that because in Washington state, our electric grid is clean and getting cleaner every year. And so when you switch to electric heat to replace burning fossil fuels like natural gas or heating oil, making that switch is a win for the climate right now. It will, over time, reduce energy costs, and it gets better for the climate every year as our electric utilities continue to improve to meet the standards that we've set several years ago. So that's 1767. We call it targeted electrification. And don't ask me to, I can explain almost anything about that bill except why we call it targeted electrification. And then the last bill I'll mention, last bill I will mention on climate is 1766, which we're calling a clean heating standard. So the last one applies to electric utilities. This one applies to gas utilities. So we've we've got on the books a commitment in Washington State to meet aggressive greenhouse gas reduction targets. We codified those in statute, and then we created the Climate Commitment Act last year to steadily reduce our climate pollution through an emissions trading mechanism, a cap and invest program. What this bill does, and the gas utilities are subject to that cap and invest program. What this bill does is goes one step further and says, hey, when we build new buildings, they're going to be committed to using the kind of energy that are included in those buildings for decades. When you put in a new furnace that burns fossil natural gas, you're pretty much committing to using that furnace for the next 20 or 25 years and burning natural gas. So if we don't plan 10, 20, 30 years out to meet those commitments that we've made, we're going to miss those targets, or we're going to have to require people to make very expensive changes. And we all know that those costs will be borne most heavily by the folks who can least afford it. So the intention of this Clean Heat program in House Bill 1766 is to require the gas companies to develop a plan right now for over the next 30 years. How are we going to meet those goals? And they have told us very clearly that they want to include things like renewable natural gas in those programs. They want to include green hydrogen. I don't disagree. I don't think those are the whole solution, but I think they're part of the solution and they should be part of the plans. But they're also going to need to account for electrification, getting back to what we were talking about with the targeted electrification bill. And Sharon has asked, what is renewable natural gas? And the short version is it's gas that results from things like landfill methane, sewage treatment. It's better to burn that methane than to let it escape to the atmosphere unburned. And if we can substitute it into the pipeline to replace somebody burning fracked gas brought in from somewhere else, that is a win for the climate. There's not that much of it, but we ought to include it in the portfolio. So the idea of the Clean Heat bill is just to require those gas companies to show their math for how they're going to meet those standards, so that we don't end up with these sunk costs for and really burdening the future with having to sort of carry the costs of the clean energy transition. So that's there are a number of other important climate bills that'll be moving along, but those are, I think, some of that's at least a flavor of some of the big ones that we'll be tackling. And I've lost track of time. I said I was going to talk for less than 20 minutes, and I have no idea whether I've done that or not. I can talk a little bit about housing if you want me to. Okay, I'm getting a nod from Deb. So what I'll just say is I think there's one really big bill, and maybe Milan, you've looked up Jess Bateman's bill, so I'll let you focus on that one. But I think there's a really important question about building housing supply in Washington State, especially near transit. And I look forward to supporting that legislation, and I'll let Milan talk a little bit more about what that looks like, and hope all of you will support that. That is a solution for meeting market rate, the need for market rate housing, which is the solution for a lot of people in Washington, but not for everybody. And I think we, at the same time that we are talking about increasing the supply of housing, of market rate housing, we just also have to make sure that we are prioritizing in our budget support for folks who can't afford market rate housing, whether that's folks who are currently unhoused or folks who are at risk of becoming unhoused. And so to me, what that looks like, two big priorities this coming year, both budget items. They don't have bill numbers, but they're still important. The first is just making sure we see a sizable investment in the Housing Trust Fund in our capital budget. And the second is a little bit smaller, but it's near and dear to my heart, supporting the development of community land trusts. Community land, if you're in Bellingham, you may be familiar with Colshan Community Land Trust, which for me is a real part of the story of how I ended up here. As a young parent, a young single parent, I was moving from apartment to apartment and stumbled across this program for Colshan Community Land Trust, which gave me the opportunity to buy into a home at a price that fit my budget, and provide stability for my family for about 10 or 11 years. And when we were able to sell that home, we sold it to somebody else who was income qualified. And they got a better deal than we had gotten relative to where the market was. And when they sell, it'll be available to somebody who gets a better deal than they got. So it's a really remarkable kind of a program. They're available in many places around Washington State, but not everywhere. And so I'm asking our budget writers to put aside a little bit of money to help with capacity building so that we can see successful community land trusts growing up and providing that same kind of opportunity that I had to people all over Washington State. I will probably pause there. There's lots more we could talk about, but we got to be coming up close to the end of my time, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Representative Tai has to say, Rep. Plekhanov if she's here, and then looking forward to taking questions. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Alex. I honestly don't know how he knew that I was looking up Representative Bateman's bill. I really don't know. This representative has psychic power, you guys. It's like absolutely amazing. So I'm going to start with Representative Bateman bill, because I think that is a good segue as far as connecting our conversation. And the bill numbered is House Bill 1782. I hope that is the right one, Alex, because Bateman is absolutely a powerhouse since she joined us in Olympia, pushing for conversation around housing. And as Representative Ramos spoke to this particular legislation, 1782, the intent is to build that middle housing to increase capacity. And a lot of it is really both giving incentive for cities, especially urban cities, giving allow them to be able to build more housing, especially those closer to transit. The one important note is that this would not apply to city having less than 10,000 residents. So a lot of these sort of incentivizes for larger cities, which we know the number of housing availabilities for people are significantly less. Another bill that I think critically important from another legislator who's not on this call tonight that I'd like to highlight because it's rather important to my heart is from Representative Levitt, and it is House Bill 1601. What House Bill 1601 does is to expand students who experiencing homelessness and foster kids who needed housing and shelter. I believe in the year 2020, the state legislature through budget proviso did a pilot program allowing city and local community college and technical college and school districts using and expanding capacity, whether it's the housing within their college or local to provide with priority to students experiencing homelessness while they attending school. And that was the report back to the state legislature was definitely, I mean, it didn't cover all the need, but it certainly have provided much needed for our students who stay in school, but needed a stable housing so that they could then concerned about their learning and building their future. And so this bill 1601 is to expand that pilot program, find way to actually build it in as a more sustainable program going into the future. So I'd like to highlight both of those bills addressing our housing issues. As far as the legislation that I'm pushing forward, and I'm hoping that it fits with this group as your top priority, the bill that's coming back from last session, I hope that I have talked to you about if I did my job. Last session was is House Bill 1202. So House Bill 1202 is the one of the 5 priority from the impacted family as far as policing and police transformation and police accountability. This particular legislation put accountability and liability on the, to me, in my word, in the power structure. And the power structure, in my mind, are those that have the power to adopt policies and to allocate funding. And these power structure in House Bill 1202 are identified as city, county, and states, who are identified as the employer of police. By providing remedies for victims or families who experiencing misconduct by police who violate their individual constitutional rights. This bill will be heard on the first day of Civil Rights and Judiciary for the opening of session 2022 on Tuesday, January 11. I have requested the chair to have this bill as the first bill to be heard in that committee, as symbolizing the opening of our session. I have a particular request, and please forgive me for calling you Julia Cochran. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. I need your help. You live in an area where you could potentially lobbying your legislators. The reason this particular legislation couldn't get out last session mainly because we didn't have enough votes. During the interim, there was so much misinformation, not only about the legislations that has passed, but also this particular legislation. In my belief, while we're working together to recruit and retain police officers of color and from marginalized communities so that they have an opportunity to, one, serve their community, and two, the community members could see and start building trust with our police force. Last but not least, I do see our police officers, our peace officers, as working individual. They're doing what asked of them. Whereas if we look at equity and we look at the power structure, we look at how these police officers being sent to training, providing support, how many of them have not been trained in regard to de-escalation? How many of them has not been trained when they face a situation where the individual they're helping are in mental health crisis? And so I believe that when these powerful structure, whether a city, county, or state, really look back into their policies and really allocating their funding appropriately, so our police force have appropriate training in how to really do their job, protect public, and provide support and help for public. That is when we can really rebuild that trust between the police and the community. I'm very hopeful. This particular legislation is already attracting national support. So we hope that we can invite legislators from other states, particularly Colorado, who have had this band qualified immunity in the book for now 2 years going on 3 years, to really share with our public and our legislators how has it reshaped police policy in Colorado. The second bill that is coming back is 1300, House Bill 1300. This is specifically in housing. It's require both landlord and tenants to have documents and documentations regarding any damage at all that landlords choose to withhold safety deposit from tenants. This would be the third legislation that this particular legislation has not moving forward. So we need your help to really lobbying your legislators to consider voting and lifting this bill to the finishing line. My other critically important legislation, which I'm very proud to prime sponsor, is House Bill 1851. House Bill 1851 is titled Preserving Pregnant Individual Access to Abortion Care. And if you heard anything different, is I wanted to highlight the word pregnant individual. In our current statute, it stated woman, and we updated that particular language so that it is gender neutral, so that any pregnant individual who need this important medical care will get access to it. Number one. Number two, if you see the what's going on at our national level, already Washington State have started providing services for pregnant individuals who need abortion care from Idaho, Texas, Georgia. And in the last 10 years, our Attorney General have issued memos identifying that physicians are not the only healthcare provider who could provide abortion care, but physician assistant and advanced registered nurse practitioners also being allowed within their scope of practice to provide abortion service. So this particular legislation will update all of those information. Number one, to preserve not only access to abortion care for all, but to also update the language specifically for all the individuals needing this service. But last but not least, this particular chapter that we opened up and updating was in statute due to an initiative that Washington passed into law in 1992. Since then, in the year 2000, that was when FDA approved a medication, a pill that could be used by individuals for abortion at home. also update language so that it's clarified that those who use pill for abortion at home would not be seen as unauthorized abortion in Washington state. And for that, we felt that it's critically important to clarify that language, since Washington state do have in statute a felony, a Class C felony for those who provide unauthorized abortion in attempt to make sure that there's no back alley abortion to any of the individual who needed this service. I'm trying to look at the time too and trying to be mindful about it, but I would be I would not do myself a favor not to talk about another bill that I'm very proud of, is House Bill 1852, and this particular one is going to be in healthcare, and this is regarding language access. This would require the Pharmacy Commission of Washington State to look into and recommend the 15 languages being used that currently spoken in our state, and require that all the direction of how to take the medication and the most common side effect be printed on the labels of prescription bottle for patient and patient's provider who requesting this service, so that any local pharmacy and community pharmacy would have the capacity to provide this service for their patients. And there's so many amazing legislation, but I will stop there in case there's question and in case Representative Lekanov have joined us. Thank you for this opportunity.
I don't see her yet, and she's not responded to the text. So if we do have, some more time, if you guys want to talk a little bit more about other pieces of legislation, or otherwise we can launch into question and answer. It's up to you guys. How do you want to do this?
I'm happy to.
Alex and Mei-Ling.
The danger, Deb, is like if you allow us space, we'll just talk until the end of time.
Yeah.
Well, we have till 9 o'clock. So.
Oh, I'm sorry, Deb. I didn't have this down for 2 hours.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yes,
I apologize.
I only have it down to 8.
Yeah, so if you guys have hard stop, then we'll just.
Let's do question and answer for the time that we've got left.
Okay.
Definitely want to make sure we're covering topics that are interesting and exciting to all of you.
Yep. So I think that the easiest way to handle this is if you've got a question, Elle will take and read that off.
I also see we have Peggy Erickson and Gary Piazzon with their hands raised. So
Okay.
I'll go ahead and unmute you, Peggy, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thanks, Al. I wanted to address Rep. Remmel and ask him a question about 1774, the energy code authorizing cities, etc., to change energy codes for residential properties. Do you think that may have a negative impact on how the poverty line?
I'm sorry, I lost you for just one critical second in your question. Do I think it may have a negative impact on what?
On households that are at or below the poverty line?
It's a really good question. And it's certainly one that I anticipate folks will raise. I believe that the answer is no, and I'll tell you why. There's pretty clear evidence, especially when we're talking about new construction, that it costs about the same to build a home with a high efficiency heat pump, with a heat pump hot water heater, as it does to build a home heated by fossil fuels. The upfront cost is within the margin of error, and the operating costs are lower, especially when it's coupled with improved energy efficiency. And so one thing I'm always kind of worried about is what happens when we sort of have builders with the false economy, the sort of idea of a false economy of, oh, if I can cut costs now, I can sell this for a little bit less. And then, you know, the people buying it down the road will just have to eat the costs of living in a less efficient home with higher energy bills. And so building right the first time is really the best way that we can take care of folks living at or below the poverty line by making sure that we're building homes that are less expensive to live in.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking of old people living in older housing though. So yeah, I understand for new, that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So the building codes bill just relates to new construction. And then the other bill that relates to existing buildings, that one's 1774. That one will eventually require landlords to make improvements on existing buildings. And in that case, again, I think you're right. There is a potential that could have an impact on folks living in those homes, especially if their landlord has to make improvements. And so in those cases, there's a mechanism in the bill to provide public incentives for those lower income housing facilities and homes in apartments in historically disadvantaged communities. And where those incentives are provided, we've created a requirement that the landlord then can't turn around and up the rent, right? You can't take public assistance to improve the building and then kick some people out because they can't pay to live there anymore. So I think we have tried to address exactly those problems, but it's a good question and it's a head scratcher because we certainly don't want to try and solve the climate crisis by piling costs onto the people who can least afford it.
I see a question in the chat. I'm just wanting to ask about other police accountability bills coming up.
I can take that. You will see one introduced by Representative Jesse Johnson. It's House Bill 1735. And this one, its title is Modify the Standards for Use of Force. But really, mostly it is clarifying the languages specifically in the standards that we have passed in last session. And that one, my understanding is certainly being supported by the Washington Coalitions for Police Accountability. Another one is House Bill 1507, introducing by Representative Enterman, and that also sitting in public safety. It is to establish mechanism for independent prosecution for criminal conduct coming from police misuse of force. There is one other important bill, and I cannot find its number right now, but it's being prime sponsored by Representative Goodman. And this particular one is to go back in some of the language in relate to a reasonable use of force and judgment as far as when police could act. That bill at this point in time is not being supported by the Washington coalitions for police accountability. So those are the three that I am aware of besides House Bill 1202.
Thank you, Rep. Ty. Gary, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I had a question about the bills related to new development. And I understand the Washington Building Code Commission is meeting to for their 3-year update, and wondering how that is going to affect or could possibly affect these House bills and what we could do to leverage that.
That is an insightful question. And what I spent a lot of the summer trying to figure out how to sort of balance these things. So I was appointed to join the State Building Code Council this year, and I'm just trying to understand how that process works from start to finish right now. But so the way it works is we develop an energy code for residential and commercial every 3 years. That gets updated. And we have a requirement in the state right now that starting in about 2012, there needed to be steady progress in each of those 3-year cycles towards a 70% improvement in energy efficiency based on a 2006 baseline. So 70% improvement in energy efficiency. It's a big goal. And frankly, we're a little bit behind on it. The Energy Code Council's current plan for the commercial buildings is up for public comment starting this month, and will catch us up to where we need to be on track for that 70% improvement in energy efficiency, building right the first time. And so that's where the current status is. There will be a similar process later this year for the residential part of the code, and I'm hopeful that it will follow that same process. So the proposed legislation, House Bill 1770, does two things. One is it will give local governments that want to be a step ahead of the rest of the state the opportunity to do that. So if Bellingham or Seattle or Shoreline or any other city wants to take an extra step, they can move a little bit further ahead, and they'll be able to do that in a way that I think will help demonstrate to the rest of the building community that, hey, they didn't stop building everything, or housing prices didn't skyrocket, as sometimes we tend to hear. So I think having that more advanced energy code helps us on commercial, and it would be valuable to be able to do that on residential. And then the second thing that bill does is it creates one more step. So currently we've got steady improvement every 3 years between now and 2031. This creates the next step beyond 2031, an 80% improvement in energy efficiency against that 2006 baseline. And net zero ready, meaning not only is it more efficient, but there's room on the roof and room in the electrical panel and wiring to support solar.
And we have a question from Bill next.
Hi, I'm the predecessor for Deb Cruz in the legislative aspects of Justice Washington. I was the president of Unitarian Universalist Voices for Justice in Washington, and I'm now the climate lead. And it's nice to see you again, Alex. We've been on programs together before. And what we're doing in Justice Washington is maintaining a website with live updates as these bills go to hearings and to the floor. And I put in the link, I put in the chat the link to the site that has the environmental bills you were talking about. So those are bills that our members can work on. And one of the easiest way for us to work on it is just go to the bill page and comment on this bill. And as you comment on the bill, you have the chance to put in your address, and that gives you your representatives and senator. And you can put in whether you support or oppose the bill and write a comment. So we ask all our members to do that. And that's one way we can be effective in supporting your bills.
And we'll cover some of that tomorrow on the ways that we can do that.
I just wanted the representatives to know that we do that, so they
Yeah.
know we're working.
Thanks so much for doing this. It's good to see you, Bill. That really does make a difference. You know, we try and keep tally in the office whenever we're hearing from a bunch of people on a bill. If nothing else, makes me go take a look and say, what was that one again? And you know, that those reminders really do sort of help us. There's a lot of bills out there right now, and so hearing from people helps us understand which ones could be the priority. The other thing that's really helpful is when the bill's up for a hearing, you can go for about 24 hours before that hearing. You can go to the website and sign in support. And you don't have to speak. You can click that you just want to be recognized as being present and supportive. And that really does help a lot too, because, you know, a lot of times we'll kind of tally how many people were for and how many people were against, and that can make a difference in terms of, you know, just the case we're making that this is something folks care about. So thank you for doing that. That advocacy is really helpful.
It's good to hear that is working. That's what we hope it works.
We have a question from France next.
Hi, I am very interested in us continuing to get off fossil fuels and electrify, but my worry is there any plan for when the power goes out? Because some people, if it's all electric, they're going to be really cold.
Yeah, it is a good question. I mean, the challenge we have is that for most folks who burn fossil fuel to heat their home right now, you still need electric for that, right? Most furnaces need a fan to operate it, or else to operate the controls, to operate the ventilation, so that the toxic fumes from burning gas don't harm you and your family. So we are reliant on a stable electricity grid. Making sure that we have continued investments in backup generation, a more reliable grid. Those are things that come with investing in one consistent, reliable system. And I think we end up over time with a more reliable electric grid with deeper investment that comes from having more customers. The other challenge that's sort of related that we often hear in this space is about whether there's enough electricity to be able to meet that need if everybody switches. And the answer is, if everybody switches tomorrow, no. But fortunately, we're not going to do that. We're going to make steady incremental progress year after year after year. And our electric utilities know how to plan for that, how to build the new generation and the transmission capacity to be able to bring in electricity as that demand continues to grow. So it's a good question. It's certainly one that we hear a fair amount. We absolutely have to plan for that. But I think making sure that we're making the investments in the electric utilities is the right way to do that, and then we can make that incremental progress.
We have a question in the chat from Tanya asking, are there any bills that address youth incarceration?
There are, but I honestly can't find the bill number at this moment in time. Most of those, Alex, I think most of those would either go to Representative Sand's committee or public safety, right?
We did pass the youth interrogation detention
Right.
legislation last year. And that one really just makes sure that minors have a right to have an attorney before they're interrogated. And they have a right to making sure those interrogations are recorded. And then there's bill on solitary confinement. I don't know I think we've already banned solitary confinement for.
No, I think that is the coming back. That I think that is from Peterson. That will be coming back this session. And then there's another one, something about making sure that our children, when they are getting out of jail or prison, they're not being sent back into homelessness. And that certainly another area for legislative action this session. But I can't find
Davis,
the bill number for you.
Rep Davis, I'll look it up while we're talking.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions, either in the chat or feel free to, and I see you, Anne?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate all this work that y'all are doing and all the groundwork with the Unitarian Universalist value of, inherent worth and dignity of all people. I feel like I've really been encouraged to work on my racial justice learning for lifelong learning. And I really feel the priorities of the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability webinar is really great to watch. It's under an hour. It's a lot to learn, but they did mention some ones that were passed last year that are pretty much, making sure they remain passed will impact lives. Like, it's made a big difference of how many people are still alive that might not have been before those things got passed. So keeping them takes all of us summoning every racial justice movie we ever watched, thinking like we're going to be positive on the right side, and blasting that. So I just really feel like that's in line with UU values for us to. If you can't watch it, I listed in there, so I'll be there tomorrow too. But I just wanted to see if anybody had any confirmation of that.
So Craig had a question on the use of force bill. Did that get addressed?
Yeah, in the I put in there that the webinar from Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, it mentions 940, which was,
okay.
I mean, that's been through all these. It's a lot of big work, but for issues of racial justice, it needs to be, the people that aren't just the impacted people speaking out for them, but the people who are learning about it. And that's me and a lot of people I know. So yes, that directly has to do with.
Okay.
Worse.
Did either one of our representatives want to address that as well? Otherwise, there's another chat.
Sure. I will just we'll just echo that. I think it's absolutely true that maybe those of us who have been privileged not to experience those injustices, it's important for us to speak up on those issues. I will say, on the police accountability legislation that we passed last year broadly, there's been a fair amount of pushback from law enforcement. But my district has in it 5 cities and 3 counties, and I've talked to all the sheriffs and almost all of the police chiefs about those policies, and there is a little bit of disagreement among them on interpretation of the legislation. And so I think there's some, and in some cases, I believe in good faith. And so I am happy to sign on to support some of the clarifications that Representative Tai mentioned. I think clarifying the intent is helpful and can help alleviate some of the some of the good faith misunderstandings and where there's maybe a little bit more stubbornness or resistance to change those clarifications can just help the change stick a little bit better. And I believe that is the intention that Representative Johnson and Representative Goodman have brought to the changes that they're proposing.
We have another question from Gary.
And could I interject that I really need to get going? So we'll hope to stay until 8:15 if that's okay with you.
Well, I think this question would be particularly interesting to you because you brought up House Bill 1601 supporting homeless students. And I just wondered if you could quickly flesh it out. And you mentioned there was a pilot program, and maybe apparently it did pretty well. And now we're thinking about advancing and expanding. So any bullet points that we could share with others about how it works?
Thank you for the question. I think what I can do is to get back and have Representative Levitt or the committee that this particular legislation is heading to share via email as a follow-up information for this group. The things about the pilot, it wasn't as a bill. And so when it came as a budget proviso, so, right, it's direct, some sort of a pilot, and it's being done, I believe it was 5 or 6 different cities ended up getting the grant to do this work. And who they reported back to, I'm not privy to, but I can speak specifically to my area, which is in the 41st Legislative District. So the city of Bellevue and Bellevue College and Bellevue School District work together. From Bellevue School District, they identify students who currently are served in the a student experiencing homelessness who would register to be the student at Bellevue College. The city of Bellevue, Bellevue College themselves, the school district, and the grant they receive from this funding pulled together to provide 15 units for students from the school district, the junior and senior, well, including students who taking Running Star. So while they still in high school, but attending college, and that's providing them housing in the dormitory. The city providing support as far as all the social support network, whether it's about food, transportation, so more of like a wrap around services for these students. And it showed a significant relief as far as stress for students who from the academic success that they have in the K-12 system, and now that they have more of a stable housing for themselves, the transition from high school to college was so significant. It definitely was a success, at least in my district, when they applied for this particular pilot program. I hope that is helpful, Gary, but as far as the detail, I haven't looked at it yet. I can follow up.
Oh, that was very helpful. Thank you.
2 more questions. First, we'll go with Dick, followed by Craig.
Yeah, I'm Dick Burkhart from Southeast Seattle, where I live in one of the most socioeconomically, racially, and ethnically diverse neighborhoods in maybe in the nation, in fact. And as far as police accountability, I've been eyewitness really outside my windows to several incidents with the police over the last decade or more, and I can attest all of them were handled very, very professionally. And so so Seattle does have some very good de-escalation training. I've seen it in action. And I'm wondering what are the incentives to provide that kind of training in other places? And I realize even in a place like Seattle, there'll be some police who resist it, but a lot of it depends on support and the kind of camaraderie that goes along with getting an atmosphere of de-escalation and knowing you're dealing with a mental health crisis and not just pulling a gun and that kind of thing.
Well, thank you for that question, Mr. Burkhardt, and thank you for the message you put in the chat.
Yeah, I know Lin Tai very well. He was running at one point. I think he was thinking of running himself.
Well, he should.
Yeah, because he invited me out to a coffee in a local coffee shop. We had a long talk. I think he was looking for some support.
Thank you. But so for the members, Lin Tai is my brother.
Right. Yeah, and we've known him for a long time in my community. He's very valued. Yeah.
Right. So no, you're right. You're right. And that's why we need this kind of legislation at the state level, right? I can say first and foremost, King County is the only county that put out levy and its constituent pass those levy to tax themselves so that they have data specifically around racial inequity. And when King County put out any program, any work toward disparity in healthcare, toward disparity in transportation, inequity in education, all of that, they have data that would back them up, that would help guide them through their decision making, and that including how they support their police department. I mean, they're not perfect in any shape or form, but they are working toward it using data that's available to them. I cannot say that when we come to our state. Most recently, Seattle also passed through ballot process to hire or appoint, I can't remember, hire or appoint police chief instead of going through the elections. And as an elected individual, I know there are certain powers and privilege for those who are elected as police chief. So we can say that across the state. 1202
is that Lin Tai's sister?
Yes.
Is attempting to do that. 1202 is attempting to put cities and county who are not Seattle, who are not King County, to be in place where they would need to also look into their policy. They would also need to look into how they're allocating funding and put forward protocol and practices so that the police officers who on the ground and doing these work know exactly what expecting of them. And it has to be across the state.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that helpful? Is that helpful?
That's very good. Yeah, I think we're making progress on that. I'd like to note one other thing is our neighborhood also is, we're part of the Othello neighborhood, which has the Othello light rail station. And we're one of the best examples in the Northwest of transit-oriented development around that station. And we've got a whole variety of housing. Some of it's multifamily, some of it's micro housing. We just had one open up. Some of it's partially market rate, some of it's totally subsidized. You need a variety of housing, and citizens can make a difference. We have a group called the Othello Station Community Action Team that my wife and I and a number of other people organized, and we're one of the reasons this is happening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And
it really works. If you look at the statistics from Seattle, they found that everywhere in Seattle, the population rate increased faster than the housing rate, except in our area right here.
Okay, so if we can get to Craig real quick so we can let our reps loose to finish up the rest of their evening get back to their agendas and work. So Craig?
Right. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much to the representatives for coming. I mean, it's been incredibly informative for me. I'm a member of the Edmonds UU congregation in Edmonds, Washington. However, I live on Whidbey Island and was elected as a council member a couple years ago to the Langley City Council. And I sit here listening to all the policy about Seattle and Bellingham, and I'm really interested to know about those policies sort of being pushed out, and there might be funding for really small jurisdictions like Langley. Our police department is 3 officers, and I'm personally really interested in community policing. It's certainly not the case that the best first responder is an armed officer many times. There are plenty of opportunities for a trained individual in mental health or any of a number of other items. So I was also interested to hear about the use of force policy changes, or I'm actually not sure, but I've been my first days on the council, we made changes to our use of force that were, really an outcome of the George Floyd situation. And I'm sure there's many more things there. I did want to respond also to Representative Rommel. I'm a member, a board member on Island Transit, and we are working really hard to adjust our routes so that they're more equitable, and also that as we do that and try to expand our transit routes, that we do it with an eye towards climate change, knowing that if we run our buses more, presumably we're taking vehicles off the highway, but we really do need to understand the additional gases that we put into the environment. And so we're doing a lot of work there, and I appreciate, state support there.
Got it. That's great to hear about Island Transit. I was certain, and especially with your commute, that there was going to be a plug in there for ferry funding as well, which is a priority, even if it's maybe not a social justice priority. I guess what I would say on your point to community policing and smaller police departments, I think it's a really important one. That we've relied on police to do jobs that other folks don't want to do, and that we haven't really done a good job of training the police to do. And we really do need to stand up a new model to respond to those crisis situations where a police officer may not be the person that you may want a police officer in the background for if it proves to be an unsafe situation. But where somebody with a mental health background, mental health training, can be a more effective intervener and can help solve those problems. There's a number of good examples of those kinds of programs working around the state. But Craig, to your point, we really do need to invest in making those kinds of programs available everywhere in Washington. And I think the conversations I have with police departments up here, police are ready to do that. They'll say things like, well, we just want to have the cops go do cop stuff. And if we can take them off that beat or move them away from that beat, I think that's the right direction long-term. But we also have to just acknowledge that we don't have that other crisis intervention system ready everywhere yet. And so we're not asking police to step back from that right now.
Yeah, I would be completely remiss to the constituents that I represent if I didn't put in a plug for the ferries. And perhaps it's because I'm a telecommuter now 100% of the time. I'm actually not a commuter, but that doesn't mean that I and anybody else here on Whidbey Island, Gary Piazon comes to mind, when we now face driving off the ferry, it used to be, I never thought about, I didn't have to strategize to drive off a ferry. I drove to the ferry dock. I drove on the ferry. Never gave it a thought that I'd, have to can be concerned about a 2-hour wait, or, oh, now we have a cadence of 1 hour. Or the most amazing thing was they didn't have enough fuel to run the ferry from Port Townsend to Coupeville. Now, granted, apparently it was a storm disruption, but it seems like every possible thing is interfering with ferry service, and not the least of which is the lack of ferries. And Representative Dave Paul, I'm sure, has talked your ear off about this. And we just need ferries. We need ferries. We need ferries to be built every year. There just needs to be a pipeline of them coming through.
You are absolutely preaching to the choir, and I will just bring it back to social justice by saying that this crisis was inspired by Tim Hyman's, forget the number on it now, but cutting our car tab fees back in
$6.95.
And when we don't have public investment in public goods, the folks who end up bearing the brunt of it are the folks who rely on those public goods. And so this is a direct consequence of an unjust and upside down tax system as it applies to our transportation system. But we see that same problem cropping up in other parts of our state budget. And so we really do need to be working on public policy that makes investment in the public good.
Yeah, and if I could make a plug for that to both Representative Ramo and myself, serving on finance committee in the House, and we need your help to keep pushing for more progressive and especially the restructuring of our tax system. I mean, we hear you. Like Alex said, preaching to the choir, we are right there with you. There's so much work that needs to be done. We just have the right revenue to do the things that we need to do to improve people's life. With that, I thank you so much again for the opportunity. I really need to go, but let's keep in touch. And thank you so much for your advocacy. Sign on to support House Bill 1202, Tuesday, January 11 at 10 a.m. Civil Rights Judiciary. Thank you.
Thank
I'll see you on
you.
Monday.
Thank
See
you.
you, Alex.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone, for all of your advocacy and all of your work to make our communities and Washington State better. Keep it up. Your voices really do make a difference to those of us working in Olympia. Thanks for the time, and hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Alex.
you so much.
Bye. Okay, I did hear from Representative Lekanoff. She had an emergency situation that she needed to deal with. So I did put in the chat box the link to the bills that she's sponsoring, a lot having to do with natural resources and the tribes. So you can investigate that. And if I can find a way to snag her, she said she'd be happy to come back